Okay.
Okay. Hello, everybody. I'm here joined today with Dr. Peter Brugger. He hails all the way from Switzerland and is the head of department at a rehab clinic and also a neuroscience researcher. He has spent most of his career researching body integrity dysphoria, and we just have him here for this 1 hour for him to share about his research and the things he's learned throughout his illustrious career at the university as well. How are you, Dr. Brugger?
Hi, fine. What about you?
I'm good. I'm
I'm
good.
I'm
Um,
happy that it finally worked out our
yeah,
meeting.
it has been quite a schedule that we've had to put this on. But I see that you are quite interested in this whole fine line that separates genius and madness. What is your take on like this whole debate? Do you believe that one must be mad to be a genius, or can they be mutually exclusive, or could they coexist?
Oh, that comes as a surprise because there is no relation whatever to the topic we plan to talk about. Well, if you ask, you have to tolerate a rather lengthy response. It's not that easy. I mean, this whole debate about genius and madness, this dates for very long, for centuries. And I was interested in that in connection with the language system. So my definition of creativity is very narrow, deliberately narrow. It's about uh, being creative in language. So creating connections between what is said or written or so. So association. I'm interested in association, and there I see the link to genius and madness, namely that both ways, psychotic thinking and creative thinking, share one particular feature, namely associating beyond classical borders or just regular borders. It's just more remote associations. And then that's where the right hemisphere comes in, language system, and so on. But it doesn't relate at all to that body integrity dysphoria stuff. It's a total. I'm not just focused. My research career was not just focused on
That
that
sphere, yeah,
bodily things. Yeah,
I
but
understand.
there is
Mm.
no in a nutshell. There is connections between genius and madness, which are worth to be explored, and from which we can really learn basic things about pathological and super well adapted thinking.
Yeah, I just thought of asking that question because I thought it was just a very interesting idea. And like, when I see many famous people like Van Gogh, even like Nietzsche and stuff like that, how you were talking about, their writings and their works, yeah, were definitely out of the norm. And like these people were seen to have some sort of like, mental disorders, especially in the latter parts of their life. But let's try to stick at the topic at hand. With body integrity dysphoria itself, many societies, many people see these patients as mad, right? As far as I know, the nosological status of these diseases is quite unclear. How would you, Dr. Brugger, like view these patients?
Well, maybe I may digress a little bit and say how it came to me that I got interested in that. I started out in researching phantom limbs, so most generally in representations of our body where parts of the body are physically absent, amputation phantom, or where they are just cut off from a brain lesion and they are physically still present, but no, can't move them.
Mm.
So they are paralyzed, and yet I feel like I would be able to move them. This is also a phantom experience. And then, well, just because I was in the business of corporeal awareness and phantoms and so on, I learned about what was called then BIID, this body integrity identity disorder. Um, Terminology changed, and I found it just crazy. I must really admit, I found it, crazy. Internet stuff, you find everything mad and crazy on the internet. So I didn't take it serious.
Yeah.
And at some point, for years, and at some point, a man from Germany came to see me in Zurich. I was in Zurich then, and talked about his suffering from he wanted to have both legs removed, and he he just turned me around. I mean, he made me believe that there is a serious problem and not just an internet induced madness, as
Yeah.
stuff has been designated. And the the very link in a narrow sense between the phantom experiences part and the BID part is that I thought, hey, if we have a positive illusion of being able to move something which is in fact no longer movable, either because it's physically absent or because it has never been developed physically, and that's the crucial link. Then there must also be something in the brain which could just produce these phantoms without, or let me say poetically. Poetically, I talked about these phantoms in persons who were born without a limb and nevertheless have a representation. I called them as kind of an animation without incarnation. So there is nothing flesh in their limbs, but it's animated. It is there. They animate a part of physical space. So it's there, provided we can prove that this is just not just
Their
uh,
imagination. Yeah. In
imagination,
their
yes,
mind, right?
wishful
Mm.
thinking also. Uh, Provided we can show this as a scientific fact, there must also be the converse, or at least it is probable that there is the converse, that something is flesh incarnated but not animated. And this would be my take on BID then, that these people carry a leg without them. I mean, it's normal. It functions normal. We have tested that neurologically. Um, it's incarnated but not animated. And if one can imagine this as a popular person, then I mean, non-academic person, I think that helps empathizing with these people. Just to carry around some piece of flesh, which is
Not
really
yours.
not your own thing, and that gave me the impetus to start research on.
Very nice. So what does the science currently say about whether if this is just all in their head? I know I've came across some research, including your own, talking about how the white matter correlation differ in these kind of patients, as well as some other theories talking about how the right superior parietal lobe in their brain is undeveloped or it's just yeah. So how would you sort of describe what is known right now or what is still quite unclear?
A relatively broad question. So I try. My approach was I'm not a neuroimaging crack. So my expertise is clinical interviews, little behavioral experiments, and so on. But in this case, I thought I had also the research money. We do a very broad approach. So we do clinical examination, we do little behavioral experiments, and of course, we also do neuroimaging. And I trusted in my former research was more successful in the behavioral domain, and I didn't expect much on the level of. But I must say, I was surprised myself. We replicated findings then relatively new from the group around Villanur Ramachandran in the Indian uh, stemming neurologist, famous guy in the neurosciences in San Diego, who found, maybe I summarize this first, who found in a little 4-page note that if one stimulated in a small number of patients, I think it were 4, who wanted to have a leg amputation, who stimulated the leg by touch, tactile stimulation to the lower part, which they did not want, they did not own, so to say. They wanted to have amputated, and the upper part. And they compared the response on that leg, which they didn't want to have. And they were mixed, I think, 2 patients with a right leg desire for right leg amputation, and 1 bilateral and 1 left leg amputation desire. And they found that you mentioned it, the superior parietal lobule, the most upper part of the parietal lobe, a very circumscribed region, that the signal there would not come through in that tactile stimulation situation, which is selective to the part which is not owned or which they want to get removed. Yeah? And that was intriguing. So we did structural imaging in many more, I think 12 or so patients, all men, not all wanting a left leg amputation. Structural imaging, and confirmed what Ramachandran found previously on the functional level, that there is alterations in the structure of that superior parietal lobule, plus some other structures. And I took it really, it surprised me in a way. The systematic findings which converge to that region. The region itself is not a surprise. And the fact that it is targeting the right hemisphere, irrespective of the person wants to get the left leg or the right leg removed, also is not surprising, because the right hemisphere is dominant for corporeal awareness on a very high level, what we could talk about body schema or body image. So yeah, there are distinct areas in the brain. We just mentioned superior parietal lobule. There is also insular cortex, a very important region in the brain. The insula is kind of buried under the temporal lobes, bilateral region, which is very important for interoception. So what's going on in your body, how you feel, and it links kind of the pure senses of the pure bodily senses, right, and animation, what I call the animation of something. But there is also alterations. There are other alterations, and now we come to the problem. In my opinion, this is a problem. With each study, with every study published, there is new regions coming in. And sometimes the superior parietal lobule is not so much in the foreground. The insula is not found in every study, whether structural or functional neuroimaging. And we have very many parts of the cortex. I have to say, it's rare that people look subcortical. We analyzed subcortical structures as well, and found some differences between these patients on control groups. But this is disturbing in a way. If you find plots there, I mean, what does it mean? I don't say there is not a neurological predisposition for these individuals to develop a desire for amputation, but it's not the whole story. It's not even half the story, I would say.
I see. Besides a neurological explanation, you were mentioning before that, socially they could have picked this up, if it's a trend. Or what are other explanations to BID that are out there?
Well, I think there is one explanation, but we have to explore that further. It's an interaction between how you feel as a person, how you feel your body in a society. After all, you are a brain. in a person, in a society. And there is a cultural bias. I mean, you don't find
much of these cases in Africa.
much of these cases, I would say. Yes, yeah. There is publication. Well, of course, you can't then publish. There is one Chinese case and one case, to my knowledge, in Japan. But Japanese people, or Eastern, you may know that better than me, have a different orientation towards their body. Yeah. And we have to explore that. We have to expect that. I'm not an expert in these domains, but I at least see that this is extremely important. So, having said this, there is some additional notes, namely that there is rarely, well, two things. First thing is there is rarely an isolated desire for amputation of a limb. There is very often the urge to pretend that one is already amputated. So these people would bind their leg up and go to a distant city to mimic being an amputee. And they go to a distant city because it would be most embarrassing if their boss sees them with just one leg, and next Monday you are back with both legs. So that's a bit suspicious. They do really a great time and a great effort in pretending. It's called pretending behavior, and that's a huge topic for them. And that's a social interaction. I know that there are people who pretend only in their homes, so the social interaction, but that's a minority. Most just want to be seen or want to interact as handicapped people or as amputees in a society. The second thing is the erotic component, and there is, I mean, see, in the history of that disorder, or let me rather say condition. I don't know whether it's a disorder, but it's a condition. Condition of BID is often accompanied by erotic feelings, that one feels attracted erotically by people who have the same or similar amputation. So that opens up a huge new dimension. And the psychiatrist Michael First from the United States, who coined the term BIID, Body Integrity Identity Disorder, he focused on some 50 cases he interviewed who do not have or barely have any erotic component to their desire for amputation, and said, here we have a new an entity, psychiatric entity. These are not psychotic persons, and these are no paraphilic person. Paraphilia is just the term for erotic, not uncommon erotic ways of experiencing. It's not. Well, is it a disorder? Is it a condition? We are on the border here, and that's what interests me, these borders between normal and pathological. So he focused on selected cases who do not have this erotic component. And in the meantime, we have discovered, I think, really trust in these many data. Rian Blom from Holland, for instance, she has shown that it's very hard to find persons where this association to erotic life so is not present. And that's also our experience in Zurich. We have really seen very many persons, but it's rare that they do not report such a component.
I see. And I'd like to quickly touch on this as well. You mentioned feelings and culture being one of the potential other co-founders in this disease. To touch on feelings a bit more, could we just say that these aren't just coming from just pure emotions, but could they actually stem from some manifestation of the neurobiological? Maybe it's that way that the brains or the genes are just hardwired to make them think, or make them or allow them to be predisposed to this condition in that way. Would that make sense? Or
Yeah, that would make sense. I really think that, yeah, I mentioned the word predisposition. Yes, and there. Well, I cannot prove this, but I believe that there is a genetic component to that disorder. Let's, yeah, let's agree on genetic component. Now, how large that is, that's another question, and we need data, of course. But after all, the condition is that rare that it's not that easy to have really thousands of cases and thousands of relatively homogeneous cases. But that's another problem in the disease. It's very heterogeneous. We just talk about amputations now. That's just the tip of the iceberg, I would say. So for genetic studies to be informative, we just need many, many more cases. Yeah.
fascinating. You mentioned now that if there's a genetic component, could you maybe think of any sort of evolutionary benefit of why humans would carry this gene then, if that is the case? Like, I know, for instance, yeah, go on.
No, sorry for interrupting you. It's not one gene. Certainly not one gene. It's the interplay between lots of genes and maybe I give you an example. I can't give the correct reference, but I could deliver it later, and you can just show it to the audience. There is a genetic work on transgender persons claiming that they had found a gene locus or an allele that codes for being transgender. Okay, and it's kind of, well, it was a splash in Science. It's a couple of years from now, but the same allele they also found is associated with the psychological trait of openness. Now, that's important. I think openness, general openness, makes you a little bit more
influence.
Yes, influence. It influences. Of course, to be open is having a different light than from being closed and so on. So to experience things other people may not experience. So even if you think, oh, we have a gene locus or a genetic matrix, it could be purely correlational via mediation of a personality trait that makes you open to some experience which other people do not.
Wow.
Sorry, it was a bit of a digression now, but
no, but that was very interesting to think about. Yes, and then I guess my question still stands. What do you think could there be, and a benefit for like humans to carry this on? Like, I know in the wild, in the animal kingdom, for instance, like apes or monkeys, when the apex or the animal that's top up at the dominance hierarchy gets injured or he gets ill, they usually are very vulnerable. They have to kind of shift down that ladder of dominance hierarchy in their own social groups, and it doesn't really serve anything to their benefit. I know they become less competitive. They'll be less seen as attractive to other males, and then they wouldn't be able to propagate their species as highly as someone who would not have this condition, or as someone who is having all of their limbs, for instance. So have you thought of any benefit of why someone would carry this gene, evolutionary speaking?
Yeah. See, now it surprises me. We are really a little bit back to the madness creativity issue. I don't see any benefit by carrying a gene that codes specifically for being not satisfied with the shape of your body and leading to an amputation desire. And so this is weird. This is really not what can be imagined. But as we deal with correlations, and I just mentioned the openness issue before, I of course see some genetic advantage in being open against being closed. I mean, this opens up new eras of thinking, new eras of development, and mediated by this openness gene, which could unfortunately be associated with some negative trait, namely not being satisfied with one's body.
Yeah.
That's how we have to see the things. And that's my concern a little bit, that people look at these things of body representation in a too narrow sense. Neuroimaging persons just concentrate on the blots in the superior parietal lobule or in the insula or there. They don't see the whole spectrum of what is very important to understand that. And your question is really brilliant. We should ask such questions about what could be the evolutionary advantage of something which has been here before Michael first described it for the first time, before there were some 17th century reports about amputation desires and so on. We have that for a long time in our genes, but not coded as a condition per se, but it must be associated with something which has cultural meaning.
I see. Earlier, you also mentioned about the alleles and their correlations with people being transgenders and stuff like that. That was something that I want to touch upon as well. I know for gender dysphoria and for BID, both these conditions, it is quite common to witness children as young as 8 or 12 years old expressing desire of sex change or amputation. Would there be any difference in how you would treat children with this condition and adults?
Well, I mean, the gender identity disorder, which is now gender dysphoria officially and accepted as a condition, condition. It's interesting that the parallel is also here with, I mentioned that formerly BID, body integrity dysphoria, was also labeled body integrity identity disorder. These go parallel lines in the nosology of diseases and so on. It's very interesting. But to come back to your question, children, I mean, I see that the gender issue, even if it's highly debated and finds some political crashes and so on, scientifically it's more established than the body integrity issue. And I know about children, very young children, claiming that there is a misfit between their sex and their gender. But would you now extend that to asking people, asking little kids, 5-6-year-old kids, hey, do you feel your left arm as much connected to your body, to your person, as the right one? I mean, would you really, in a kind of suggestive, not deliberately, but certainly suggestive way, to interrogate kids about these issues? No, this is very dangerous, because you could really implant some desires they would never have invented without your intervention. Or you could, given, especially in a child with maybe big openness, a gene for large openness, you could actually trigger
implant that idea.
Questioning, implant an idea, or make it maybe not implant, but free it
Normalize.
from, yeah, you could free them from discovering that there is something. Yeah. Anyway, it's about the same. It's about the difficulty of asking young kids about these things, and but it's again, your question is of course of theoretical importance. We don't have data in small children about body integrity dysphoria as we have for the gender issue. I just tell you, my prediction is that we run into severe problems once there is a recognized. I mean, ICD 11 lists BID as a official disorder, mental disorder. Yeah? So from January 1st of this year, 2022 on, we don't deal with just a condition only. We can, of course, but it's also listed in one of the statistical. It's not in DSM, in the American APA generated things, but WHO, the World Health Organization, has accepted this condition as one of the illnesses, diseases.
Okay.
That means a lot for the people who are concerned with that in their own mind and in their own bodies, because they hope now they have an agenda in a way. They hope that they are able to get an amputation, which is legal in our Western countries without having to travel to some locations where they pay a lot for such amputations, etc. So they hope that also health insurance will pay for that, because in the University of Zurich, for example, there is a huge surgery on male, female, what is it called? These sex reassignment surgeries, yeah, and this is paid by health insurance because it's a recognized medical disorder. And what awaits us here, I don't know. I mean, these are problems of societies then, and no longer just problems of an individual which lives in a society that may think, oh gosh, what crazy people are these.
See. When you mentioned like, especially with children, we have to be so sensitive because the things we do or we suggest implicitly or not can plant an idea in their head, and it can maybe even normalize certain things. What do you feel about sex education going on, talking about different sexualities and stuff like that, and maybe even in the future, not even sex education, maybe general education, just talking about BID and exposing the kids to this kind of ideas? Do you see any ethical issues right there, or do you think kids should learn about this? Yeah.
Well, I never thought in such concrete terms about this. I'm an elementary school teacher by training originally, so I know the kids' interests in all kind of things, and I think certainly there is very much to do about sex education, gender education. This whole thing must be broadened up very much, whether to include things about body education. How would you, I mean, how would you sell that to a kid? Let's now talk about having a body. I mean, I don't see the need there now. I don't see it. I'm not saying, maybe if the societal, the cultural impact of this whole business gets larger and larger, one must discuss everything which bothers the society also in the classroom. But so far, the model within scientists' brains is too large that we could design a program for education for kids in that domain of BID. In GD, yes, this should be much more discussed than it is currently.
Even with the risk of giving kids, that sort of idea of transitioning, you would feel that it should be discussed in classrooms.
I think yes. I think yes.
Okay.
I mean, this gender dysphoria issue. Yeah.
Okay. I see. In terms of treatments then for like adults for this disease, for BID, talking about BID, I know Johnston and Elliott released a paper in 2002 arguing against the surgeries or any elective treatments for this disease. And I remember one of them saying, whatever the roots of the desire for amputation may be, the boundaries of the condition are flexible and overlapping with other social phenomena. And then they concluded with saying it is not clear that the desire for amputation is properly seen as a medical disorder. I know now you mentioned, the WHO makes an exception to that, but they were also saying, let alone the amputation of its own would be the appropriate response for these patients. Now,
what do you mean by amputation by their own? If they do kind of a self amputation?
No. As in just like a medical one with doctors.
Yeah. As you mentioned, this is back in, I didn't know it, 2002. Like that. I mean, they really, I like that article by Johnson and Elliott. It was relatively, it was very good, very well informed about the status then at the beginning of the new millennium. Now, in the meantime, we have much more data. And I think I understand the cautiousness these authors had then, because we didn't have any data on persons who actually succeeded in getting the amputation. Now we have that. We have published work on a bunch of about 20 persons who had an amputation and who are really
who do not regret it.
Sorry?
Who do not regret going through the surgery.
Yes. Wow. Yeah, that's what it is. Who will not regret, and whose desire does not, and this is very important, does not spread just to other limbs. Oh, I was successful with my right hand. I could maybe also, my left foot is not quite hooked up as it should. So it's really, there is some kind of a cure, because you don't have the limb you wanted to have removed, and that's fine. They are happy.
That's interesting, because I was gonna say, would it be something like plastic surgery where they get their breast done and then next day they want even more and it moves on to the nose or the eyes and the mouth? But okay, it seems like it's quite a good solution. I guess, how would people who are in the ethics community sort of justify this? Would it be because if we don't give these treatments to the patients, they would cut it off themselves, get risk of infection, gangrene, or they could potentially die from suicide and having depression and low moods? Would that be the common justification for allowing these treatments to go through?
Well, just again, by comparison, let's talk about sex reassignment surgery. I mean, this is something similar in a way, to say the best. It's much more of an ethical issue, in my opinion, than just cutting off a limb. Because to make, if I deliberately think in binary terms now, to make a woman out of a man or a man out of a woman, that's very much more difficult, if not impossible, in my opinion, than just to make an amputee out of a regularly formed person. So ethically, this should be much more of a problem, the sex reassignment issue, than this body integrity disorder or dysphoria. Because after all, these persons are suffering not from the physical, they don't have pain in their legs. They don't have excruciating pain which would demand amputation. But it's as much excruciating the pain
Psychologically,
psychologically,
social.
right? And medicine is here to help. And I mean, this is very narrow-minded. If an ethical board would say, well, we don't remove anything, we feel good in our limbs and so on, they lack the empathizing with such people who suffer. Oh, talking about ethical boards is very difficult. This opens a box of worms. So don't talk about ethical regulations. It's woof. That's the worst. That's actually what could uh, avoid that I would choose to be a scientist again in the next life. Presence of ethical boards. Sorry, a digression, but
I understand. I know CBT and SSRIs, the serotonin inhibitors, are prescribed, but they're not cures for this, and they're not very effective for this condition. Correct?
No. That's as a precondition. We have to say that, of course, amputation should be the last resort. I mean, we just would never just see a patient. You want to have your leg removed and sign something, and he goes over to the surgery ward. But there are studies about pharmacological treatments of PID. There are lots of studies about all kinds of behavioral treatments, psychological treatments. Nothing works. Let's be frank, nothing works. Unless you look for secondary effects like depression, because they feel that people with PID may feel depressed because they don't see any chance to realize their desire. They don't see the chance even to talk openly about their condition and so on. And this makes you, understandably, can make you depressed. But depression is then secondary consequence of the condition. And of course, psychotherapy may alleviate depression, may alleviate maybe
Symptoms.
just symptoms, right. But this does not mean, in my opinion, no psychological treatment can ever treat or cure a person from PID.
Right. Just to because I'm not sure of this myself, but I would just like to know, is it somewhat similar, the whole process of getting a surgery done? Like, I know, for instance, in Singapore, in where I'm at right now, if you're suffering from GD, gender dysphoria, and you want to have a sexual assignment surgery, first you would have to go through extensive screening, extensive research by the psychologist, psychiatrist. They're making sure everything, you don't have any other sort of similar displays of other conditions. They want to confirm that you have this condition for 6 months, and then through that they will try, maybe, as you mentioned, psychotherapy, CBT, other forms of counseling. If that's not enough, they might try other, prescribing medicine.
They may even have you to adjust your voice to get. If I want to change into a woman, there is speech therapists focusing on switching the gender in a voice. I mean, sorry, but you are right. It's a long and tedious process.
So it is the same for BID. It is that strenuous as well.
No. It's not yet. I mean, this just started. For BID, I just can anticipate it will be the same. It will be similar. You will have to show that you behave, that you are able to behave like an amputee, and that you are aware about the secondary problems, like acceptance in society with only one leg and so on. I can't imagine that there is a comparable program like in the sex reassignment
for sure.
surgery pre-screening. But this is also what you mention is also something a bit bothering, namely that there is a whole medical business now made out of these cases. It's clear that we also must not just take the slightest wish to change gender or sex
for profit.
Right. There needs to be kind of a preparation phase. But think of this preparation phase in terms of business. Who earns? And you mentioned that before in a different context. Sorry for switching back. But you mentioned these aesthetic surgeries, this, correction, nose correction, stuff like that. This is also something, I mean, where is the border? Correcting your nose. I mean, where is the border between totally changing the appearance of your breasts in a female case and the amputation of an arm or a leg? I mean, where is the border? If you think that's not that easy, you cannot just make a cut and say this is something aesthetically, this is something not aesthetically. I mean, where's the border? And this is also what I meant as a cultural component in BID. I mean, these beauty operations or beauty images, this body image in a social sense, in a cultural sense. This is all what has an influence and on BID, on the suffering of individuals in the Western world, and maybe also must be regarded as the reason for why in some other cultures, maybe Asian cultures, I'm not an expert again, but they do have a different relationship, these people, to their bodies, especially to their bodies in society. So it's really not surprising that the incidence of BID differs from one culture to the other.
Definitely. Yeah, I know in Korea especially it's becoming like a hotbed for surgeries now. It's quite normalized over there as it's compared to Malaysia or Singapore. I see. Do you foresee one day that the science and the technology could come to the point where they are able to kind of fix that like right superior parietal lobe or the regions in the body, like the brain that's responsible for causing this like issue with the patient? Did you ever see that one day happening, or are we very far off?
That's kind of a science fiction question now, but let's be visionary. We cannot solve problems without being visionary. By the way, I would count this question as one research designating one research domain within the big program of phantomology. We started out from talking about phantom limbs and so on, and phantomology is actually a term introduced by Stanislav Lem, the Polish scientist, right? And it's a wonderful chapter too, I think, in his Summa Technologiae, which was very late translated to English, a little bit earlier to German, but it dates from the 70s, I think, in Polish. And it was so visionary. The account he gives there, he anticipates problems of virtual reality, which simply didn't exist then. And he, up to little details like cybersex, and he says there that body representation, stuff like that, can be investigated and should be investigated by techniques of virtual reality. It doesn't use that term, but it's phantomology, the representation of the body in our brains, in our mind. And coming back to your question, what was it? Whether I foresee
a technology able to cure
technologies. Foresee, not really concretely, but I see that there will be attempts to to circumvent amputation, to circumvent changes in the body configuration, which are the physical body, by changing um, the mind in a way, the mind, the individual mind about one's body. This is very dangerous because it smacks of psychosurgery. I mean,
One mistake.
We know. Sorry?
Like one mistake could set off like a whole.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. We should be aware of that. And that's also what I always say. It's so important to have the link to the previous history of medicine, because we have committed so many, in the medical domain, we have committed so many errors. So it's a high chance that history repeats itself if we are not aware of that form of errors. So yes, of course, as a thought experiment, I see these attempts to technically manipulate, you mentioned the superior lobule. The problem is exactly there. We again come to speak to that little part in the brain, in the right side of the brain, superior parietal lobule, but we must also target the insula. We must target the left prefrontal cortex, because this is also one of the regions affected, affected in that condition, BID. So where would we begin? We cannot sap there by TMS. There is currently research on its way in Holland again, but I don't think you can just sap by TMS. The most the first association that comes to mind is deep brain stimulation.
Right.
This is used in Parkinson's research and very successful there in this.
Increase the dopamine and everything, right?
Right. This is you insert an electrode into regions which are really crucial for guiding this neurotransmitter ways and so on.
Substantia nigra or something like that, part of the.
Yeah, right. Well, that's the dopamine region. Yeah. It's the subthalamic nucleus where you actually stimulate electrically in these persons, and they have here peripherally they can adjust the current. It's really impressive. A person who would die because he or she would be unable to eat, to feed him or herself, because he would shake that terribly. He would not be able to live. And you switch on the generator and it's normal, like you and me. So it's really impressive. But where would we stimulate in EIT?
Yeah.
Well, so there is so much research to be done that we simply cannot recommend any particular procedure technically. But again, it's part of phantomology, and it will go on. Research will go on, and that makes sense.
Out of curiosity, what is the procedure like covered in Switzerland? Will the healthcare there take on the costs, or is it just everything out of pocket from the patients? They pay for their own surgeries, they go for their own BID treatments, and
there is, to my knowledge, there is so far no precedence case. There's no case so far under the new law, under the new situation that the condition is a mental disorder now. I mean, it's just too new. And there are no surgeries performed in Switzerland. This takes probably years.
Yes.
Also, this ICD-11 is under a kind of a supervision, not supervision. It is so new that there might be drawbacks and a reformulation of the issue. It's not that established as one would wish it is, but it's a first step. It's for the first time ever that the condition has
been recognized like that.
Named the label of a disorder. Whether this is good or bad, we cannot say now. I'm not 100% sure.
Right. We're coming on to the last few questions. For BID, for GD itself, they predominantly affect a lot of males. Would you have any explanation or any ideas as to why?
It's a very important observation, and it's true. I mean, there is a gender effect here, and I must say I don't have a clear idea, but it tells me that there is something. Again, it's both that there are cultural components to this. Men are different in their communicating their feelings and so on. And it's also, if you look at suicide rates, kinds of suicide. I mean, we have different choice of for suicide, bloody things or more medication things and so on. There is a huge gender effect. Well, it doesn't mean that there is some gene of the ways to commit suicide. I mean, this is must be some complex issue of societies.
Definitely.
And so there is this component, and but still, I personally believe that there is some hardwired or some genetic component to that. Let me give you one example. There is way more men having an amputation desire than women. But if you go to, and we didn't talk about that, we neglected totally the desire for paraplegia, so to have paralyzed legs. And I know of very many people here who would say, oh gosh, what did you do in your interview? You absolutely did not mention that. And then it's important, it should be mentioned. It's also a case of BIT. And in this case of desire to get paralyzed, we have still a little bit more men, but only a little bit more. It's roughly equal to gender distribution there. And this led us, I think it's published, it led us to speculate about a possible neural basis for that. It's always bilateral. It's no, I haven't heard of any case who says, I would like to have the left leg paralyzed or the right leg paralyzed. Either it's amputated, and then it's mostly unilateral, mostly the left leg. And these people who desire amputation of one leg, they would abhor the idea
of
to
the
be
other.
paralyzed, and vice versa.
Right.
If somebody with a paraplegia desire is offered to have his or her
amputated,
he would abhor it. No, I want to paralyze them. So just to say how specific it is. And the reason why female relatively to the amputation desire are more prone or more attracted by these, or more, the incidence is higher, relatively higher in females, is because it's a bilateral issue. And in the female brain, if anything, is less lateralized than men's brain. I have to say I believe in this because it's not a generally accepted scientific fact. There are people who say, all these sex or gender differences in the brain, this is, they just come down to one basic thing, which cannot be denied, that the brain is larger in men than it is in women. That's a trivial observation. Yeah. It's not worth any thought. I mean, it's
agreement.
Doesn't do anything. Yes, there is at least agreement. But I believe that in this lateralization issue, and we come back actually to the hemisphere again, and to the issue of creativity and madness, if you want. I believe, and there are lots of data, that female brain is less specialized. One hemisphere does just one thing, the other hemisphere does just the other thing. Namely, as a visual spatial for the right hemisphere in the right-handers, and the language issue in the left hemisphere for right-handers. And given that, or accepting that as a scientific fact, we could say that the two legs are represented in both hemispheres. And that may be the reason, or one of the reasons, why female brain is, or why women are more attracted bilateral, necessarily bilateral paraplegic.
Right. Okay. I guess in that regard, would you say those kind of explain away certain gender differences in terms of like career aspirations, in terms of interests as well between the two sexes?
There must be such purely social factors as well.
Definitely.
But first, I'm not an expert, primary expert in this, and second, I couldn't really come up with an explanation in terms of such factors. I mean, men are more and more, well, having comparable business issues like women. So I don't see how would you, I mean, yeah, if I may ask a question, how would you elaborate such a role of social factors leading to the preponderance of men in the amputation case? I mean, how would the argumentation be?
Follow. Yeah, for sure. Lastly, then, I guess before we wrap up, I would just want to ask you, what would be the most interesting study you have ever performed or learned on the job as your role as a researcher that has just taken you so far?
In the domain of embodiment in the broadest sense. It is a study I did. I mentioned that I started out from studying phantom limbs, and phantom limbs in persons born without that. So this is very different issue, because phantoms are usually regarded as, and even nowadays, as perceptomotor memories of one's own limbs. So if I have this hand for decades, I lose it, then there are imprints in the brain which make the phantom appear. Now, they don't have any, and this was a woman, this was one particular case. This was a woman born without arms and without legs. So she couldn't even take the feet as representatives of hands, and still she claimed to have a whole body. And this is, I mean, I must keep attention not to talk now a whole hour about that. But I give you one example, and as a physiotherapist, you're a physiotherapist, right? This must interest you. I asked her on our first meeting, this woman born without, do you sometimes fold your phantom arms? And she said, well, very rarely, but sometimes I do. So I asked her to fold her arms. Right. And I can do that with you. Well, maybe you fold your arms, and which arm is on top of the other?
My right arm is on top.
Right, okay. In her case, it was the left. And I asked her, but of course, I didn't see anything. She had just stumps of 20 centimeters on both sides. And I asked her, well, okay, left. Could you please do it the other way around? Namely, that in your case, your left is on top. In her case, your right is on top. And she did. Oh, gosh, I will never do that. And this was the point in my career that made me, I was very skeptical about,
definitely
just wishful thinking and so on. But this turned me into a believer that this is real. And from there on, my whole work expanded on something which I didn't really know whether to believe or not. And from there, I told you, I came to this animation without incarnation, incarnation with animation. And this led me to BIP. This little observation, this was one of the most, it's not public, well, it is published, but it's not focal publication. It's a small observation. And this is what I'm saying. Small observations, I trust them more than just observing activations in the brain, which have a long history of pre-processing, post-processing, and so on.
That is very fascinating. Thank you so much, Dr. Brugger, for sharing this whole hour with us.
I thank you for really very good questions, and I really admire and I appreciate that somebody from physiotherapy. You're not even you are still learning.
I've just graduated, so now I'm actually practicing. Yes, and like just to touch a bit on like the phantom limb pain and things, because I did touch on that as I was learning about pain science and how like it's very biopsychosocial. It used to be a biomedical belief, and then now it's turning to like, you know, it's sometimes the central nervous system can be so sensitized that the pain just exemplifies, right? It's not just all about the tissues or the bones or the structures. It can just be psychological placebo effects and stuff like that. So I find that really, really fascinating. But do send me the research that you were talking about the alleles and the transgender, because I would love to put it on the screen and just to show my audiences exactly what you mean. But it has been a great hour with you, Dr. Brugger. I wish you well.
I wish you also well. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.